Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself and come on there.
No problem at all. How's your day going so far?
Great, thank you. It's almost over here in the UK, so I guess not for you guys. Maybe just getting going for you guys, is it?
Yeah, just it's noon over here, so we're just right in the middle of it. But yeah, I appreciate you stopping by and taking some time at the end of your day. And congratulations on the new record. It's this has to be a really exciting time for you guys as a band and as creatives.
Yeah, thank you. It has been really. It's our eighth album, the one we have coming up. Well, it was released yesterday, actually, as we sit here. So yeah, it's really exciting. I guess a strange time to be doing it. It's sort of a long time since we did the last one. COVID, everything got in the way. So yeah, we find ourselves here kind of 4 years after our previous album, which is quite a strange thing, really. But I'm glad we're back, and it feels like an overly long gap. But I'm happy that we are here, and I think it's a really great one. So I'm hoping everybody else hears it and thinks the same.
100%. I mean, so this was definitely something that was due to circumstance. The reason that you guys had such a long hiatus, I would imagine that if the pandemic and everything didn't happen this way, you guys would have released probably sooner, it sounds like.
I think so, yeah. Well, I mean, our last album, which was our seventh album, called The Reckoning Dawn, that came out certainly from a UK perspective, probably I don't know, like 5 or 6 weeks into those first lockdown periods that were happening during the COVID pandemic.
Oh wow.
So that was kind of good in some ways and bad in others. So I think a lot of people bought that record and kind of had time to listen to it because they were at home and probably, not didn't know what was going on. So
Right.
a lot of people stay home from their jobs or got on these kind of 3 months off work while the world kind of figured itself out. So lots of people bought it, but then we had all these tours lined up and they all got cancelled. And then certainly from a UK perspective, we were in and out of lockdowns and things. You weren't able to go out, and then you were, and then you weren't. And
Right.
then shows could have like 50 people, or like, you had to wear a mask. So there's all this kind of craziness. So it probably took us about 15 months to be able to even think about touring the last album. And then it was probably another year before we could then tour that in the sort of Central Europe. So by the time we'd done that, I think we were at the end of 2022. And so, you can't just make an album out of thin air. So we spent 23 kind of writing and recording a new one. And then we find ourselves here a year later almost, kind of, as it's just come out yesterday. So yeah, it feels like a long process, but I'm kind of glad we didn't rush another one out. You know what? I don't know if you feel the same, but there was certainly this kind of, in my opinion at least, just I don't know, a raft of all of these COVID albums that were coming out every
Hmm.
week,
Oh yeah.
like 30, 70 metal albums or whatever it was, rock albums, everything coming out every Friday. And it's like people have only got many hours in the day. They've only got 2 ears. You can't be listening to kind of like three things at once. So I'm kind of glad all that sort of calmed down a bit now because I think there was just this overwhelming, I don't know, wave of releases that were kind of coming out, and I think now that's calmed down, it's maybe a better time to release some music.
Yeah, that's funny because that actually leads into my next question. Because I was going to ask, since there was such a wave of, post-COVID records, what were you guys sort of looking to do to make yourselves stand out and sort of stand apart from those records? So I guess maybe waiting out through that period was actually part of the strategy.
Kind of. I just think we were really happy with our last album, and
Right.
and I suppose we didn't just want to kind of, I don't know, like forget about that one in a sense. I think lots of people had lots of time on their hands and were able to make great new records and do whatever they wanted to do because they had, 3 or 4 months of free days writing stuff at home. But from my perspective, I was like, look, we've just done a record. I really want to be able to kind of go and share that with people, go and play some shows, go and connect with people in a live environment, and play some festivals and kind of do these songs for people. Because it feels really weird, like putting all the time into that record and then being like, let's just leave that one. We'll try, try again, and then and do a new
Yeah.
one. So we were quite keen just to make sure that we had the opportunity to tour those songs because we liked them, and I think people really liked them as well. So also, you don't want to fatigue your audience. I know, like, lots of there's lots of different kind of viewpoints on that. Like if you're not into, I guess the weird end of the family tree where we exist at the bottom end of metal somewhere, in the kind of outer rim of extreme metal. If you're even a more mainstream artist, you tend not to find people putting out albums all the time, do you? It's like random songs here and there every few months and things like that. And so I get this kind of need to kind of keep your profile up or whatever. But I think from our perspective, we're kind of old school in the sense that we still like making albums and we still like having this kind of tangible thing that you can hold,
Yeah.
rather than it just be I don't know. I'm not quite into this idea of us being content creators or something yet. We're still artists, I think, and I kind of loathe the idea of being this like comedy personality that's trying to make 30 seconds like video clips.
So how do you balance that then as a group? Because obviously, being out there on social media, there is this sort of notion that you need to be in people's face all the time in order to be sort of active or in, relevant in the space. But I do think that the people who sort of approach it differently are more appealing to me. I mean, how do you balance that sort of approach with also being out there and sort of approachable and accessible to the fans?
I think it's very difficult, from particularly the kind of music that we're playing. We're obviously playing this kind of, I guess, quite niche for some people, but like atmospheric black metal as it gets called, and it's a quite visceral art form. It's extreme in some ways, but it's very melodic. It's very uplifting. It's quite outward looking and organic sounding, but it's quite aggressive as well. And I think that there comes with that a sort of aesthetic and a territory that you need to occupy as an artist, and you almost feel like you have to, because it's I guess because it's supposed to be this kind of emotive and artistically distant thing. I don't know, like if like for example, if you're like Jack Black or something and your band's Tenacious D and your whole vibe is about like silly songs and kind of making people laugh and it being a bit more, I don't know, theatrical and dramatic and just this kind of sideshow type thing. It's kind of fine to be a personality in that. But if you exist at a different end of the spectrum from that, I think social media can be a very hard thing for bands, because you sort of want to keep a distance because there's this whole artistic aesthetic that you're kind of trying to put across, like it being about this kind of landscape imagery, or I don't know, I guess a sort of more distant, not about us as personalities. It's about the output,
Right.
not about the fact that I'm a character or that I'm some kind of comedic personality. So it's very difficult, and I think you can do that in a sincere way, but I think inevitably that kind of narrows who you can approach with it, and I suppose that's the trade-off you have to take. And for your artistic vision, if you're in this end of metal particularly, because there's no there's no real desire from us to be personality. So I think that's a hard thing when the whole world is kind of rushing towards this 15-30 second clip culture. And so I
Yeah.
know artists have to adapt, but for me it doesn't quite chime with where I am at as an artist. So it's hard. I think we don't struggle with it, but we try and keep things to be relevant and artistic rather than funny or comedic or whatever it might be.
Right. And I mean, I would imagine that transfers into the music as well, because the overarching theme is authenticity. I mean, do you find it more challenging today, and especially the post-pandemic climate, given the things that we're discussing, to be authentic and to remain authentic as a group and as an artist?
I think it is challenging for artists. I don't think it's as challenging for us, because I think we have quite a clear idea of what we want it to be. And because
Right.
it's not our sole endeavor, like our lives are not, well, obviously, like it's our passion, but our lives are not 100% intrinsically linked to like us having to make a new record or us having to do things in a certain way. So I think some artists can get trapped in that space where they have to make a new record because they need to be on the festival circuit the next year, or they need to kind of have a new thing to be pushing. And I suppose that that can be a problem for that sort of thing. You feel like you have to kind of be on the train's always got to be on the tracks, and you kind of have to sort of bend into what's going on to be popular. But I think for us, it's perhaps an artistic decision to not be quite as available, I guess. But it's a hard thing. I don't think we're ever going to be headlining arenas where we are kind of the sort of the music that we're making. But certainly we want to be able to do it in a kind of an authentic and a passionate way, and something that kind of at least keeps the sincerity and the mystique around the topics that we're talking about, around the style of the music. Because if you don't, I think it can sort of cheapen it for the audience that really cares about it. And like I think if you're not doing that and looking after the people who really care about it, you're only really kind of playing to the people who might come into it if you're a sort of different
Right.
personality. So I'm hoping that it speaks for itself enough to bring new people in, rather than I don't know, some kind of crazy marketing stunt or something involving us as people.
100%, letting the music speak for itself. So I'm curious, when you guys got together to make this record, you mentioned 2023, was this completely new material from scratch, or were there sort of skeletons of ideas that you guys had brought back and fully fleshed out for this record?
That's a good question. I think, I guess if you talk to lots of artists, you probably get a sense that most artists don't ever stop. I think
Right.
you have periods of kind of peaks and troughs of it. So, when we're making a record, we're making a record, so it's like, right, we've decided that in this 9 months or whatever it is, we're writing now. So like 2 or 3 times a week, you're all getting together and bringing stuff. But I guess you don't stop that in the off season, if you like. You're still kind of still got a guitar in your room or in your house somewhere. You're still picking it up and playing things. So when we came into this record, this new one that we've just done, I think we had a few ideas lying around, which is good in a way, really, because it can be quite a daunting thing just as an artist with like write a blank sheet of paper going, okay, we have to make 55 minutes of an album here. Like, what does it
Right.
sound like? So I think it's good to at least have a few seeds of ideas or a few things that you can kind of at least base the starting point off. Even if they don't end up on the final thing, I think it's like a seed of an idea, isn't it? And I guess that's a good thing. So yeah, we had one or two unfinished songs from the last album at least this time, and I think songs that were kind of half developed and ones that we didn't think we needed to finish. Like last time, I think we had maybe like 15 songs or something, and then there was a few that were left over. So
Okay.
we're just like, I don't think we need to take 17 songs or something into the studio. So we've got enough material. But yeah, it's good to have that, and I think it's good to have something to at least be a jumping off point for, because otherwise it can feel like quite an overwhelming task to fill the
Yeah.
blank sheet.
That's daunting, right? You gotta come up with a whole record on the spot. I mean, for the ideas that you did have some ideas, right? I mean, when you're talking about today's social landscape, you're talking about life post pandemic. How do you make those ideas that you had before sort of gel with that? Or was it a situation where it actually was on the same track already?
Yeah, I think I mean, I don't know how much you know about the history of the band or not, but we've always had this, I guess, overarching theme of trying to be sort of political, but kind of it being more of a like helicopter view of society. Like I guess our view of what we think is going on at the time. So it's not like a partisan view about like a certain political theory or something. It's more just like, here's how we kind of view the social landscape at a given
Mm,
moment. So our band's always had this idea of trying to tie in some of the kind of goings on in the current world with like great kind of ancient texts from like the British Isles where we're all from. So there's like great poetry, great like old literature and things. And what's really interesting when you look at that stuff in the context of the modern world, you've got all these kind of ancient texts that are kind of writing stories about, I don't know, battle, war, conquer, triumph, loss, all these kind of things that are going on in the past. Actually, when you read these things, it's funny how you can kind of tie that in a kind of quite interesting way to how the world is, and it sort of gives you this strange
mm,
perspective about the fact that maybe we've always been like this as people, but the way in which it occurs is just different. Like obviously people were only fighting with swords and shields or whatever in the very early eras, but then now it's war is waged on a different front through social media, through I don't know, advertising, through whatever way kind of people are sort of communicated with through the world, and it can just be quite interesting. So we kind of aim down that way with that sort of stuff and try to bring some of that into the modern world and kind of have this helicopter view. So when it comes to, I guess, putting lyrics onto songs, I think that there's a similar but kind of progressing concept to that. So where are we in the world now, and how do we feel about the kind of landscape of the world now? And I think if you're a citizen of the world like I am, you potentially see the same issues or the same problems that I see. That I think our governments did a terrible job of the pandemic, for example. Like certainly in the UK, like wasting billions of pounds of money on giving it to their donors and supporters to make protective equipment for people that never arrived, and all the kind of like, that's just like one example. It's like all these things all the time. Things not getting funded publicly. Public services going down the pan, people's cost of living increasing, and power companies recording record profits, all these kind of things that just kind of go on in the world. And you think, is that really like just all happening by accident, or is actually something a little bit more sinister going on here? And so I
Right.
think that, I think even like the most kind of passive of people are starting to think the world's a little bit of a kind of maybe not quite as nice a place as I thought. Certainly at kind of the top levels of management and government, if you like. And so I guess it's the role of artists and like us to try and poke some holes in that, or kind of give people the means with which to consider those things. And even if you don't agree,
Mhm.
or if you do, it's just good to think about things that you don't always think about. And so, anyways,
Yeah,
we can kind of put that on the songs because it's the next phase of that in the world.
for sure. No, and I mean, it's fascinating to me to think about, and I think it's really cool to tackle that as an artist. I mean, when you're doing this with the band, because obviously these are things that are very hot topics nowadays, and I think that some people, it's a big trigger for them to even think that there may be sinister things going on, or that governments may not have our best interests in mind. When you're putting this together with the band, is it important for you guys to all be on the same page, or is it like you guys don't have to actually be on the same page in terms of agreement, but you're all together trying to push out a certain message?
I think it's a good one to ask because, yeah, I mean, obviously people are different personalities, aren't they? And they kind of have different perspectives on things. But I think we've always had, uh, even if we differ on kind of our individual opinions about certain things, I think we've always had this idea of a kind of overarching concept, sort of spearheading the point of what we're doing. And I guess really like all of this, you know, even though it's kind of like I guess based around whenever the albums come out and kind of where we are as people and a band at that point in time. The overarching point of it, I think, is just about um, freedom in a sense, peace and freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and making people be more aware of the kind of little things that happen all the time that sort of chip away at your kind of your personal freedoms. And it's we're in a very much more connected world now. So even though I live in the UK and like there's I speak to journalists from all over the world as part of the kind of press campaign for this album. It's funny that there's this kind of like overarching theme that I'm kind of feeling from everybody, which is there's kind of all these just little things that are happening all the time. Like, oh, that now there's a tax to drive into the city. Oh, now there's a kind of I don't know if you want to do this, well, there you can't do because of some carbon thing, or there's always just these kind of
Mm-hmm.
little things coming in every country, and it sort of worries me that like people are going to kind of blink, and then also and all of a sudden, then maybe you're kind of not as free as you thought you were. And I guess when that's been the kind of hallmarks of some of the kind of big countries of the world, the UK and America, particularly with like all the stuff you talk about in terms of Bill of Rights and personal freedoms and all these kind of things. It's funny how those things kind of still get chipped away at. Look at things like in the States, like the Patriot Act and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or we just pull out a bit of legislation, and all of a sudden you've got no rights at all. So there's kind of very kind of sinister things that go on under the guise of it being for everyone's safety or whatever. But I just think these kind of things happen, and it makes the world, I don't know, a bit more of a dangerous and worrying place. And I think if you've got children, and you're like, well, what kind of world are we like walking into? So
Right.
you make these albums, you try and make people think about those things because most of the time people are just happy getting on with their lives, or they're too busy trying to kind of make a living or whatever they're doing, and they're probably not thinking, oh, actually, if this thing comes in and then that thing comes in, where does that leave us in 10 years or something? So it's
Yeah,
to make people think about things that they don't always think about.
for sure. Yeah. I mean, when people are trying to make it 10 days, to buy groceries, it's hard to think about 10 years, but I do think it's important to at least have that in the back of your mind. And with guys like you bringing it to the forefront, I think that will help in a lot of ways. So it's an interesting thing to think about.
I hope so, yeah. And I think as big or as small as we will ever be as a band, the best artists out there have always kind of challenged those norms or pushed people to think about those things in certain ways. You can look across artists from all walks of life and all genres speaking to their communities, in different ways. Like I think I remember reading as a child, like people like Bob Marley, for example, were talking to like the people of like of his hometown and his home nation. They were almost getting more news about public matters from his music than they were
Right.
from kind of like the actual media and things like this. So there's always been that vein of protest and questioning authority, I think, in all veins of music, no matter how it is delivered. And I think that we kind of share that spirit. And I hope that it's even though it's delivered through emotive and visceral extreme metal, I guess it still probably shares the sentiments of some of those other artists who've maybe done it to a higher profile.
100%. I completely agree. Now, how about in terms of the band going through a lineup change during this process? How did that exactly impact the work that was done on this record?
Well, I think it was a good thing in some ways for us. Obviously, it's hard to lose a member. Like we lost a guy called Dan who was our lead guitar player for quite a few years. So he moved away through no real sinister means. We didn't fall out or anything. He just kind of was like moving a little bit, well, quite a lot further away from where we are now. So obviously, it's hard to be in a band when you're literally geographically quite far away from the band.
Right.
And so of our artwork still and over the years. They make mistakes to me of just kind of well, like running out of ideas sometimes, I think, or kind of maybe like recycling ideas. And I think there's a difference between having a sound that your band kind of maintains, but then not doing anything with it. And I think, I mean, I know we've been criticized maybe of people thinking, oh, our sound doesn't quite evolve, whatever it might be. But I think there is a sound that bands have. But for me, it's great to have some new blood in the band. In Russell is the new guy that's joined our band on guitar as well as me. And it's good because he plays differently than me. And when you have somebody else coming into your band that's not been in there for the past 15 years or something, it's good because the way that they see things is not always the way you see things. And so
Right.
sometimes when you're writing songs, like me and Nick, who's one of the other guys in the band, we've written a lot of the songs over the years. And so it's good sometimes when another guy comes in and goes, actually, why are you guys going that way when the song should go that way? And you're like, oh, maybe we should follow your way rather than our way for a change and sort of see what happens. And I think that's been really beneficial to this one because I think we still have kept the sound of who we are to an extent, but yeah, with some new cool influences from a different player who doesn't quite think the same as us. And I think that's been a good thing to kind of challenge our normal way of doing things.
Is it easy, do you think, for new members to come in and really share their ideas, or do they sometimes feel a little bit more cautious with putting that out there as they're just sort of joining new territory?
It's funny, isn't it? You hear these funny, like, well, I don't know if it's a funny story, but you hear these kind of urban tales about, like, say, someone like Jason Newsted when he was in Metallica, for example. He was in Metallica for I don't know how many years, 15 years or something like that, whatever it was, or longer. And he was always treated like the new guy, which feels really, really bizarre to me. And like
Yeah.
how they never wanted him to do any other bands, and how they, didn't always take his input and things like that. And then when he left, I think they were all felt really guilty about it and had loads of counseling or whatever it was. And so I don't know. I think because we're not running this band like a business like maybe they are, and it's more about kind of people who are friends in the real world as well as being in a band, because I find it really
Right.
hard to just have some kind of random guy in our band that was just interested in making music and wasn't interested in the camaraderie or the social aspects of being in the band. So I, from my perspective, having a new person come in, he was a friend already, so it's like he wasn't like a complete, unknown to the band. He was a friend of the band, but he definitely played guitar a lot differently than I do. So I think it was kind of good that we probably played more shows of like the previous album with him before we started
Right.
writing. Otherwise, it might have been a kind of contrasting styles. But actually, it was great for us to work together and learn songs together and then start to write. I think if he just come in and be like, right, I've got 15 song ideas, let's go, it might have been a very different thing. So
Yeah.
bed in with people and learn each other's ways first. But you should be listening to people. If you brought somebody into your band, you've done it for a reason because they're a great player or they're a great talent in some way. So I don't see why you would suppress them just because they don't immediately think like you do.
Yeah, I completely agree, and definitely a great comparison with the Metallica situation. The one thing I notice about the new record as well is that it ends just as strongly as it started, and that to me is one major criticism I have for some bands with some of their records. It seems like they start with their strongest material and it slowly fizzles out. Talk to me about keeping that consistency throughout the record and having it be hard hitting all the way around.
Well, I guess this kind of comes back to what I was saying at the beginning about trying to be an artist and not just like a content creator. Like Russell, who's our new
Right.
guitar player, he has this real chip on his shoulder about the fact he's like, we're artists, you know, we make albums, we don't make content and all this sort of stuff. And I know that the two things in the modern world are kind of inherently linked in some way, but we've certainly not been trying to write like 40-second clips to go on a TikTok video or something. You know,
Right.
we've very much been trying to make I don't know, like a visceral and emotive piece of artwork. And so you write a bunch of songs, I guess. And so I don't think you can be quite as contrived as to say there was this 100% artistic vision for the whole thing, and we knew exactly what was going to come out where. You know, you can only really write what comes out. And so you know, someone writes something and then somebody else writes something, and the songs kind of evolve. But when you've made them all, I think it's really important to think about how do they fit together. Like, how are you going to take the listener on a journey? You know, and
Yeah.
if you put like 6 songs in a row that are all 100 miles an hour and they're all like heavy drums and it's all screaming and it's just this like, you're just going to fatigue someone's ears and you're not going to connect with them on any level. So you need a slower song, you need an interlude, you need an intro, you need some like twists and turns in the music that keep it interesting, and like it becomes this sort of sonic landscape, for want of a better term. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, you know, if you're making like grindcore or something and you're making like 20 tracks that are just like all the time at you, then it becomes like, wow, that's so extreme. But also, there's no way I can listen to an hour of that. So
Yeah.
you have to kind of, you know, think about that. And so um certainly in the traditional way of making an album in my head, and some of the great albums that I've loved, you start strong, you know, you come out fast with a few, 2 or 3 like fast, immediate tracks. Then you have a bit of a breather, maybe a couple of slower tracks, an interlude, and then you pick it back up again to a really big track at the end. And I think that it has to be this kind of like roller coaster of, you know, like up and down and like end strong, start strong. And
Yeah.
also, I think, you know, just try not to write bad material. Is there, I realize that's easier said
That helps.
because we're not, I think, you know, I think all artists are generally very good at what they do, but lots of artists get caught up in the idea that we've only got 6 months. We have to make a new record, because if we don't make a new record, then it can't come out by next summer. So we can't play all the summer festivals. So we can't do a tour in September or October. And they're kind of trapped in this industry cycle of, if we don't do that, then we miss all the opportunities for next year. And obviously they're all income generation and people are making a living and stuff. So you end up not having the creative freedom you would probably need, which is, I think, why a lot of
Right.
people's early albums tend to be the ones that people love the most.
Hmm.
And so there might be flashes of great songs on the 10 albums that come later. But, you know, you've only had a limited amount of time to do that because you've been touring. Right, we've got 6 weeks. Quick, let's make an album. And then, is that ever going to be your best work? I don't know. I don't think so. When you've got no
Right.
pressure to make an album, I think you've got all the time in the world in a sense. So I think from our perspective, we love making music, but we didn't like need to put out an album. Like we weren't doing it because we are like, oh my god, we need to go on tour to pay
Yeah.
our mortgage.
We're on a deadline or whatever.
Exactly. So I think that helps us to refine things and listen to it. So I guess with that in mind, you try and write the best stuff you can. You try and self-edit. You try and not be, I don't know, oh that'll do. No, we
Right.
should, you know, make something that's great that makes you all excited, and then put the best ones out of the 15 tracks you've written on the album. And so
Yeah.
that was the plan anyway. So I hope that comes across, and I think the early reviews have been really great. I think lots of people are really connecting with it, and that's all you can hope for as an artist, I guess, that people come on that journey with you.
Without question. Speaking of making a piece that is not intended for a 40-second clip, I think there's no better example than In Silent Grace. And I'm curious about the two versions as well. Talk to me about the decision to make two versions of this track.
Yeah, well, the track, well, funny enough, we were talking earlier about was there any material left over that we started with. And so the track that's called In Silent Grace was the one track that we didn't finish from the last album. I think we only had the first two sections of that, and they were kind of, they didn't feel like they fit in the last album, and I don't think we'd quite developed the idea of where that song was going either. So we were like, right, well, let's come back to that one. And because, as I say, the blank sheet of paper is very daunting, I think that was one of the first tracks that we kind of worked on. So again, like, not knowing how much everyone that's watching this would know about the history of the genre or whatever that we sit in, there's a great and quite well revered band called Primordial from Ireland, who are, I guess, one of the sort of the bigger bands in the kind of pagan black metal, folky black metal sort of genre. And they were definitely an influence on us when we were starting our band. And so, Alan, who's the singer of that band, is a close friend of ours now, and he has this amazing kind of gravelly, kind of semi-singing, semi-shouting, very kind of passionate vocal delivery. And so when we were coming up with that song and we were sort of singing ideas for how it might sound, we were like, no, this sounds like an Alan song. So we just said, well, he's our friend. Let's maybe ask him to do it. So he came over and did the recording with us in the studio, and it was brilliant. But we obviously wanted that to then blend with it being a song of ours as well. So I sang on it and he sang on it, and we kind of blended it together. So the main album version, which is whatever it is, track 5 or 6, track 6 on the album, it features both of us sort of kind of doing a vocal trade-off. I do a bit, he does a bit, we do a bit together, and it's I think it's really nice. It sort of highlights both bands' strengths. But then because he'd done this, it's a huge, emotive, long, quite languid song. There was then a version of it which is a sort of bonus track at the very end, and that's only on certain versions. So if you buy the kind of deluxe version or whatever it is, that song's also on it. But that's just him singing it on his own. And I think that's even though it's the same song again, like 6 or 7 tracks later. I think it's still
Yeah.
a great thing because there'll be people who would be really interested just to hear like what it sounded like with him doing the whole thing. And so that's kind of what that is. And I think it's a huge centerpiece on the album. And certainly a lot of the reviews I've seen so far and feedback from fans has been, we absolutely weren't expecting this track, but we're really glad that you've done it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it sounds awesome, and I think it's really cool for the fans to have both sides of that coin with the different versions. For anybody watching, the Imperious Horizon is out now, and we have all the links you need to connect with the guys down below in the description. And Chris, congrats on everything, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. You guys have a great record, and I know people are going to continue to enjoy it.
Thanks. I appreciate speaking to you. It's nice to do something in a little bit of a different sphere for us. So I'm hoping we kind of connect with a different audience. And cheers for taking the time to speak to us as well.
Awesome, man. My pleasure. Have a great rest of your day.
And you too, man. See you later.
Okay, bye bye.